College Success Strategies by Holsuch and Mills-Stoljonic, and we'll get into that right now. Basically, we were asking questions about how do we reach humanities courses, what strategies should be used to be successful in humanity type courses, and how can I modify any of my existing strategies to suit different types of courses and different types of texts. So essentially, we said that humanities, again, were any of those courses that focus on the areas of human endeavor. In fact, the text describes this as broad and diverse as the courses encompassing literature, philosophy, and any of the fine arts. So music, art, theater, but also you've got foreign languages in there and any kind of history that would be associated with the humanities. Strangely, humanities also sometimes includes the anthropology department because it's the study of human endeavor and progress, as well as belonging to the social sciences department because it is a specific science that uses facts, dates, and other statistical data to assess human evolution and endeavor. I said endeavor twice, but you get the idea. So sometimes it straddles both social science and the humanities. Just a word of note there. There's a lot of lecture typically, as well as a lot of discussion, especially in foreign language and literature classes. Now, it's really interesting because in my vein of study, I actually am more like a literature professor, but I teach writing because that's where the majority of the work comes from. We do have 200 level literature classes here at Kishwaukee College, and if you like this class, or if you liked any of your other writing classes at Kish, and you need to make up some credits for I don't know, extracurriculars or something like that, or you need to pad out your schedule for some reason, you might want to take one of the more interesting literary courses available here at Kishwaukee. They're probably going to be smaller courses, I would guess, on the average, and they'll probably involve some kind of an essay or paper. Maybe not as many as you would find in a typical writing course, or there may be more. It depends. I remember that when I was a college student, I would have one or two short papers and then one longer paper in my early writing courses. I took two writing courses. I took 112 and or maybe I just took one. Anyway, I took one writing course before I got into my literary classes. Um, and I had to take a couple of writing uh, semesters there. So I took um, Southern Women's Writing and a course called what was it? A survey of English. And in most of those classes, I had to make a choice to write two smaller papers spread through over the course of the semester, about 8 pages each, or between 5 and 8 pages each. And then I had to write another, or I had the choice to write one long paper of about 15 pages or more. And of course, I didn't trust myself in those courses, so I would often force myself to do the shorter page option, which meant I turned in a paper the midterm, I turned in a paper near the end of the class. So that way I knew that I could stay on a consistent schedule and make sure that I did what I was supposed to do, as opposed to leaving myself a huge paper, a 15-page assignment near the end of the semester. That typically didn't end up well for a lot of students. As with any kind of course, you should try to begin by figuring out what your specific task is. Although you may have had a lot of experience with humanities courses in high school, a lot of your instructors, or many of your instructors rather, probably did a lot of the heavy lifting for you in terms of lecturing and perhaps even creating notes too. But in college, and specifically in this textbook, they break it down into a focus on history classes and literature classes. So most history professors will start to encourage students to think differently about history as they have in the past. Specifically, they will still be asked to respond to various key terms and identification items, but they'll also have to discuss significance. Literature-based courses typically involve writing about more abstract ideas, which could include mood or character development, various themes, and the like. Now, no matter what the task is, you should realize that humanities textbooks tend to be a little bit different. And as such, you should get ready to gear up for your reading. Specifically, in addition to the text, your humanities books will usually have a lot of more photographs, sometimes maps, and text boxes. And your authors really have a heavy emphasis on text boxes because they say that more often than not, your quiz and test questions might come from the text boxes, especially a history text in a college level course. When it comes to annotating, you may want to avoid some of the pitfalls of how to annotate a text. Medieval monk syndrome refers to that tendency students sometimes come into in college by highlighting everything. I inherited a couple of used textbooks for students that use the medieval monk method. Like half the book was highlighted. That's not really going to help you when it comes time to review, because you're just going to read the whole chapter again, and you might not have time or the energy to do so, nor even be able to focus on any significant details based on that system or approach. So to avoid that, our authors suggest that you read longer sections at a time before you begin marking. Then when you are finished with said section, think about what the important information would be to tell somebody after you had read, and then highlight or underline that text. Students sometimes also use the nothing here approach or fall prey to the nothing here syndrome, where they don't annotate very much at all. They may focus on random words or boldface headings and text. That's problematic, however. Typically, there's not enough information associated with these terms of the margins, and that leaves you with too little content to study, which means that you'll probably find that you can save time when you study because you falsely think you can save time in studying because there's just not much to focus on. Realistically, though, what you should do is write your annotations on sticky notes if your margins are too small. And then, let me see, what does it say here? I lost my place. Oh yeah, okay. If you don't feel that you don't have enough content, use the cards and question answer methodologies to augment your study. Lastly, you should be aware of the rest of the story syndrome, where students demonstrate a pitfall of identifying key topics, but they don't annotate for complete ideas. So to avoid that, you should write everything you think that you need to remember down in one place, even if it seems like it's common sense in retrospect. Okay. Let me see, what else? Okay, when you take notes in humanities courses, specifically for history courses, think about whether or not your instructor uses an inductive or a deductive method. So remember that inductive instructors tend to teach with lots of facts and information and conclude in a more general sense. So they start with a very specific focus and then they give out multiple general examples, whereas deductive instructors will start from a broad topic and get down to very specific content. I think a lot of the times your best instructors probably realize that you as students generally prefer the deductive method of lecture. But like I've said in past presentations, not all instructors have that same level of teaching practice behind them. So I would suggest that you be prepared for the worst case scenario. The last thing I want to talk about today is, or as a terms of a reminder, is the idea of a timeline. And timelines specifically are a good strategy to use for humanities courses, because a lot of times in humanities courses, content is arranged by genre, by topic, but usually, especially in history courses, they're designed in a chronological manner. So this is one opportunity for students who do well with timelines and do well with establishing the relationships between times and various eras of discussion and engagement based on their ability to organize information in a chronological sense. And obviously a timeline is going to help you to do that. Okay, let's move on to strategies for science and mathematics. Once again, this comes to us from our text, chapter 14, which kind of concludes our triumvirate of social science strategies, humanities strategies, and now we have strategies combined for mathematics and science. So mathematics and science courses are usually divided up into two components. Math-based or science-based courses, usually called problem-based courses, and more text-based science courses. Math-based science courses like chemistry and physics usually contain more formulas and are similar to the mathematics texts that you'd encountered in high school and in previous college instances or college advanced courses. Whereas text-based science courses, in terms of how this book is set up, would focus more on courses like biology, agriculture, forestry, botany, and astronomy and geology, your earth science types of courses. That's not to say there aren't interesting labs or even really cool experiments that can be performed in those other courses, but they're just more information based. There's a lot of, they read a little bit more closely to the way that social sciences courses do. And so in that way, there are there's a bifurcation when it comes to math-based courses, or problem-based courses and more text-based courses. Okay. So here are our study questions for this chapter. They're very similar. So again, moving through them relatively quickly. How do I read strategically in science and math courses? What strategies should I use to be successful? And how can I modify my existing strategies to suit different types of science and mathematics courses and different types of science and mathematics texts? Of course, as always, you should start by asking yourself, heralding way back to chapter 2, what's the task? What is it exactly that it's being expected of me as a student? Well, number one, with science courses, you may encounter a lot of new terms and definitions. Terms that are introduced early on, especially in mathematics courses, will tend to be used later to define other terms. So because concepts often build one upon the other, it's important to focus on proven principles and theories. Ask yourself, as you are approaching a reading assignment, how do these principles and theories connect to each other, and how do they explain the concepts that are under discussion in a particular chapter or section? Again, you've got an opportunity for lecture-heavy courses, so good notes are a must. In fact, many of your science and math instructors will think of your textbook as backup, like an extra sort of, I don't know, document that you can refer to. Whereas the bulk of the information that you're going to learn, that's all tied together with their lectures. So this is a case where the lectures might have new or better information, especially in the sciences, because science textbooks take a long time to publish and update, whereas your instructor might have new or better information that comes to you off the cuff. So again, a heavy emphasis on your ability to show up to every class and take meaningful notes. You'll still have a lot of multiple choice questions, especially in those more text-based science courses. But you will have some basic memorization, but also some higher level concepts. Often you'll have to apply concepts in order to create a particular answer. Okay. So when it comes to reading in math and science texts, realize that, again, there's a general movement or characterization that we can rely on. Science textbooks often are sequential, meaning that one idea forms the base of another more complex concept. This is especially true in math. So the authors of our text suggest that you test yourself as you read and limit the amount of material that you annotate as you progress. Now we're going to get into annotation in more detail in just a little bit, but I wanted to mention that early because it's important that when you are going through your science text, you need to match your annotation to the course expectations. Meaning, for example, if you're expected to think at a higher level, make sure your annotations include more than just bold-faced terms. You should also create reading goals for yourselves. And what I mean by that is that when you create a reading goal, you should pause to monitor how much you're learning. because a lot of this material comes to you in pretty thick sections or chunks of information. Try to also focus as you read on concepts, not simply chapter completion. It's not going to do you much good if you can breeze through a science chapter or a section, but you don't retain anything. So focus on learning the key concepts versus chapter completion. Additionally, your authors suggest that you take a scientific approach to reading, meaning that you begin to ask yourself a series of questions as you approach each new chapter. What data support this concept or theory that you're reading about? What other theories are related to the central ideas under discussion? How does the phenomenon described actually work? In other words, what's the process involved in checking on that experiment or proving that rule? Why does it occur if it's a natural phenomenon? And what does it show us about the relationships that we are reading? Okay. As you gear up, this is one of the most standard or critical tips, and you've seen it as a theme that develops. If you're going to read a book that's assigned to you for a class and you have an assigned reading before the lecture, make sure that you read it before you attend the class. You're going to get more out of the lecture and you're going to be more organized and be able to take better notes if you have some idea of what's being discussed. That's pretty basic, but really important, and for my money, one of the best tips that this book offers up. Also, reflect on the title of each chapter and ask yourself, what do you already know about new content that might be delivered? Of course, as always, when you're pre-reading, you should pay attention to your primary and secondary headings. Now, some science-based texts will also include a course or a lecture, chapter, what have you, outline. If that's the case, I would always take the time to read that before I got into the main chapter. And then, of course, before you begin reading, complete your pre-reading routine by skimming the chapter to make sure that you can be on the lookout for any key terms, diagrams or figures, or chapter objectives and guide questions. Because science texts will often contain diagrams or charts, make sure that you ask lots of questions about the concepts described in diagrams or charts so that you can read and understand each one correctly. And of course, our favorite section, how and what should I annotate? We've already touched on this a bit, but one of the key things with science and math texts is that when you annotate your texts, make sure that you express ideas in your own words. Because more often than not, even with really thorough study, you're really going to need to inculcate this information into your mind and blend it into your long-term memory. That's why it's important to use your own language to make sure that you can facilitate that process that much more easily. Also, pay special attention to various experiments and focus on their results and the conclusions that they or that the authors draw from the experiments, because you may be asked to either duplicate the experiment or you may be asked to understand the significance of the experiment and how it tends to direct our learning. Try to make connections between previous material that you've learned and new ideas or concepts that are being introduced. And of course, pay special attention to those diagrams and charts. For note-taking, again, notebooks are more supplemental, or textbooks rather, are supplemental to your notes, meaning that the important material is probably going to come to you vis-a-vis lecture. Any diagrams, figures, or illustrations that your instructor uses, you should try to duplicate as accurately and as precisely as possible. And place those into your notes too. This goes for formulas and equations as well. You should also, for the sake of your notes in science courses in particular, get used to scientific notation and use various abbreviations, and do that as frequently as possible, because this will only help you facilitate your understanding and deepen your knowledge, but it will also save you time. The authors of your textbook recommend the split page method, where you use guide questions and page numbers, figure details, and illustrations on one side, usually on the left-hand side of the paper in a column. And then the remainder of your paper is where you should answer those questions or direct your ideas to answer those issues. When you're studying in science, they also have some specific suggested strategies that may work. According to research done by your authors, concept maps are a real key idea to gravitate toward as they refer to science courses. Because you can use concept maps to track key terms and theories, it's a good way of reviewing material and making sure that you have a full comprehension of how it impacts larger ideas and themes, in addition to studying the basics. The CARDS system, which we've talked about for the last couple of chapters, can be used in mathematics and science too, because you do have the opportunity to inculcate new vocabulary and terms into your arsenal of information. Charting is also a nice technique to use as well. When you chart something, you can map the similarities and differences, and that's pretty important. They have a great example of someone charting the similarities and differences of molecular bonds on page 191 of your text. They talk about how covalent and ionic bonds can be broken down and described by their composition, forms, examples, and properties. So that can really help you to distinguish between how two concepts are similar and how they are different from one another, and how those similarities and differences inform the relationship between them and how they can inform your understanding of those relationships. For math texts, they include a very specific and distinct section in this chapter. Math texts will usually contain new formulas, concepts, or diagrams, but again, they tend to be sequential. This is because mathematics courses usually strive for cumulative learning, which means there is an objective that your instructor wants you to meet before the end of the semester, as opposed to a singular or sequential series of objectives that need to be understood. So for mathematics in particular, it's important that you master one concept before you move on to another. So if you feel you're falling behind or that you're lagging in some way, shape, or form, get help sooner as opposed to later in the semester. That way you're going to be able to make sure that you're keeping up with the pace of the course and that you have the concepts really well within your grasp, or they're well understood. Again, most mathematics courses are going to be highly lecture based. You may even find that most of a particular lecture session is focused on working out various problems in class. If that's the case, I know that might not be the most exciting prospect for a weekly, daily course routine, but I would go through it and just try to gut it out and work those problems with your instructor. That goes without saying that you should preview the text before class so that you have some idea of why they're adopting the various topics or problems that they're approaching. So in addition to previewing your text, when you preview, focus specifically on new concepts, any new terminology, and distinctive formulas that you may need to be familiar with. Then, this is kind of distinct and different. Then, after class, read the entire chapter and do so as soon as possible so that the ideas have time to set in your head. When you are annotating a math text specifically, focus on keywords, formulas, definitions. We've seen all that before, but also symbols. You may find new symbols as you advance in your mathematics studies that you had not been exposed to prior in your prior high school or other math courses. So make sure that new symbols are added into your notes as well. The workload in these classes tends to be more cumulative, so it's important that when you're studying, you do a few practice problems, but you do it consistently. So a little bit, but every day. And that's a proven formula, no pun intended, or actually, yes, pun very much intended. That is a formula for success in most mathematics classes. Consistent work every day, but you don't have to overindulge in the amount. When you have questions that occur in a class, write them down. And try to create your own practice problems. I think this is really an interesting strategy because when you create your own practice problems, especially if they're similar to the ones similar to the nature of the questions that you're asking in class, this can not only ensure there's some variety in what it is that you're learning about, but you can also understand the process as it unfolds and it has more meaning for you in terms of a study experience. This is another great suggestion here on the top of the right-hand side column. Don't be afraid to use another math book if you find your assigned text to be difficult. There are a lot of different ways to explain the same or a similar concept. So don't get yourself so locked into your assigned math text. Take a trip to the library or visit our library virtually to look up reference materials in terms of math or any other subject that explains the same material but maybe just does so in a different way or goes about the process in a innovative fashion. So don't be afraid to use another math book. I wish I would have known this back when I was in high school. Reach out and find a better math book. They're not all made the same. Additionally, it's a good idea to verbalize mathematics problems because this inculcates that idea of the musculoskeletal memory system. Sometimes if you speak through the process of a problem, you can remind yourself of a particular step that you might miss otherwise, or if you're stuck in a math situation, just quietly mouthing the process to yourself might generate a spark of memory. When you're plotting those practice problems, they also suggest that you try to plot practice problems which require you to use several various concepts that you've studied over the course of a semester. And last but not least, try to use study groups. If you think that you're alone in being frustrated or phobic about mathematics courses, chances are that's not the case. Try to form a study group using the principles that we've discussed in the previous chapters. Look for students who are within your course, but not necessarily your friends. Look for students who are able to explain various concepts or bring something to the table. Try to meet in a comfortable area consistently that's in, it's conducive to the study of a group of group think. And, try to be able to be flexible with students' schedules. Using a study group may be the key that you need to be a better math student. I know that while I didn't necessarily have a study group, I had 2 or 3 friends who were really good at mathematics when I was in high school. And reaching out to them and having them explain the concepts sometimes made the difference in how the content was delivered. That might seem silly, but you never can tell unless you exhaust all of your options. All right, now for next time, which will be Monday, from Monday's class, try to read through our final chapter, chapter 15 in College Success Strategies. That's all focused on using technology to learn. And you can find that material in a very short chapter, 7 pages, 195 to 202, and that will be the end of our assigned reading for the semester. Now, next week, you're going to have another weekly quiz, and it's going to be over chapters 12, 13, and 14, the various strategies chapters. So that will be interesting, I think, to see how that information is coming together. So don't forget to look for that next week. This week, of course, you're just responding to your weekly discussion questions. So that should be relatively easy for you. I don't see any issues thus far, but if something should come up, as always, do not hesitate to contact me. Okay, that's it for today's lecture. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I hope to hear from you if there are any issues or problems. Otherwise, I will see you all on Monday. Take care, everyone.